Welcome to the latest discussion with the World Bank Inspection Panel. Today, we're going to be discussing the Santa Cruz Road Connector Corridor project. My name is Mark Goldsmith, Chairperson of the Inspection Panel, and I have with me Investigation Officers Camila Amaral and Ayako Kubodera. The way we're going to be considering this is we're going to start with the project, a bit of understanding of that, then we'll go on to the requesters and what their concerns actually were. And then we'll look at the findings that the inspection panel made, and then we'll come on to the actual Management Action Plan, or MAP, as we like to call it, MAP. And then finally, we'll consider the institutional learning that the bank had in relation to this investigation. So we're going to start this discussion with a bit about the project. Maybe, Ayako, you could tell us a bit about what the project actually was.
Sure, Mark. The project is located in the Chiquitania region in the eastern part of Bolivia in the lowlands. The main objective of the project is to improve transport accessibility by rehabilitating a road from gravel to asphalt concrete. The road is approximately 208 kilometers in length and run north and south, going through 4 municipal capitals. The other project works include construction of bypasses in populated areas, 3 small bridges, and upgrading or constructing approximately 300 culverts. The project is quite significant in the context of regional and national road connectivity. The road is located in the heart of agricultural and economic center of Bolivia, and the northern and the southern ends of the road intersect with major highways that connects Brazil, Chile, and Peru.
So we have an understanding of the project. Maybe you can now tell us a bit about the request, the requesters, and what actually were their concerns?
So the request was submitted by 4 individuals who stated they are the leaders of 4 Centrales Chiquitanos, the organization of Indigenous Chiquitano people. The requesters claimed that the project will threaten their land and livelihood because the road that's being upgraded under the project will bring in opportunities for illegal activities and settlers to move into their area. The requesters alleged that they were not meaningfully consulted on the development of the Indigenous Peoples plan that was approved in 2016, and that the plan neither mitigated adverse impacts nor granted them access to project benefits. The requesters also had concerns about the effectiveness of the implementation of the revised Indigenous Peoples plan that was approved in 2022. The requesters expressed their concerns about the hiring conditions of the project's contractor and alleged that the project workers are engaged in sexual exploitation, abuse, and sexual harassment of Indigenous women and girls. When we went to the field, the requesters and the project-affected people raised additional concerns. These were related to the right-of-way, resettlement compensation, borrow pits, atajados, as well as on road safety and road accessibility. And these issues were raised to the attention of management, to which they had opportunity to respond, and the panel included them as part of the investigation. And lastly, Mark, I'd like to highlight that the requesters and the community members who we spoke with were not opposed to the project and saw the benefits of the road upgrade. However, they felt that their concerns on adverse impacts had not been heard or not being adequately addressed.
Thanks, Ayako. So now we've got a good understanding of the project. We've got an understanding also of the requests, the concerns of the requesters, the Indigenous peoples, the Chiquitanos. Maybe, Camila, you could tell us a little bit more about findings in relation to the Indigenous peoples.
Sure, Mark. So when a project affects Indigenous peoples, the policy requires that culturally appropriate and social economic benefits be provided, as well as an action plan to avoid, minimize, mitigate, or compensate for any of the potential adverse impacts. At the design stage, management believed that the project consisted of an upgrade of an existing road and that it would cause no significant harm to the Chiquitanos. However, contrary to what is stated in the policy, that affected people should be consulted on both the positive and adverse impacts, the Chiquitanos claimed that they were only presented the positive aspects of the project and they were only consulted on the benefits of the road upgrade. And these consultations are what guided the development of the activities that would be proposed under the Indigenous Peoples Plan. So this is what we looked at in our report, and what we tried to show was the discrepancy between the Indigenous Peoples policy and the intended outlined activities under the Indigenous Peoples Plan. The panel believed that very few of these activities were likely to deliver on the intended outcomes. So I can give you some examples. One of them are the artisanal workhouses, which were supposed to promote economic activities. They were small, and the machinery that was supposed to be used for weaving, crafting, did not fit inside, and there was no electricity for them to function anyhow. This is a very water-scarce region, and the community depends on water for their livelihoods and even for human consumption. And the project had committed to drilling wells. While these wells were drilled, they did not provide potable water, which was one of the commitments in the project. Another one of the activities under the Indigenous Peoples plans is the construction of the Casa Grandes, which are large community centers that aim to promote cultural activities. However, the communities were concerned that there was insufficient information in the Indigenous Peoples plan regarding how these centers will be operated, or if there was a budget to maintain these centers once the project was finalized. So the panel found that management did not ensure that the social assessments had adequately assessed the potential adverse impact on the Chiquitano communities, nor did it ensure that free, prior, and informed consultation was held with them, which in turn contributed to some of the challenges I mentioned in the design and implementation of the Indigenous Peoples Plan.
Okay, so we now have a good understanding of the findings in relation to Indigenous peoples. And then, Ayako, when you were discussing earlier, you talked about some additional findings in relation to road transport that actually came up during the panel's mission and that management was starting to address. So maybe you could tell us a bit about those findings.
So Mark, let me speak about the issues related to the right-of-way and resettlement, borrow pits and atajados, and Camila can speak next about the issues related to road safety and occupational health and safety. First, on right-of-way and resettlement, the panel heard from many project-affected people about their concerns and lack of information, lack of clarity on how the width of the right-of-way was determined, application of the right-of-way, valuation of compensation, and the methods of compensation payment. We reviewed the resettlement action plan and identified no significant gaps. So there seemed to be an issue with implementation of the resettlement action plan. The panel found that management was in compliance for minimizing resettlement, however, not in compliance with bank safeguard policy requirements for not ensuring compensation payment prior to the taking of land or other assets, and for not ensuring appropriate methods of compensation payment. And on borrow pits. So what are borrow pits? So the borrow pit is a piece of land that has been cleared so that it can be used to extract or excavate materials for construction use. So there are two issues related to the borrow pits in this case. First, the community told us about the issues relating to the contract negotiation process with the project's contractor and the communities for the uses of the land for borrow pits, how these contents of the contract were presented to them, non-disclosure clauses in the agreements, and unfulfilled commitments in the contracts. And the panel noted that there is a huge power imbalance between the project contractor and the community during the contract negotiation process. The panel found that management didn't ensure provision of measures to minimize, mitigate, or compensate adequately for the negative impacts. These included providing adequate support to the Chiquitano communities during the contract negotiation process. Secondly, we reviewed the project safeguard documents relating to the borrow pits. The panel found that management didn't consider environmental and social aspects in an integrated manner when identifying or mitigating impacts on borrow pits, and that the implementation of environmental management plan and environmental and social impact assessments on borrow pits to be inadequate. And on atajados. So the atajado is a pond or a reservoir that's used by humans or cattle or animals for drinking or other purposes. And as Camila mentioned earlier, the Chiquitania region is extremely dry, and the communities experience acute water shortages during the dry season. So any impact on the existing water source is a very serious issue for the communities. When we went to the field, the communities told us about the negative impacts that the road construction or the project activities had on their atajados. For example, the water inflow into the atajado had been blocked, or there was sedimentation or contamination of atajados from the road construction, or water runoff from the road or from the borrow pits. The panel found that management didn't ensure identification or mitigation of impacts on atajados. So now I turn to Camila to talk about the issues related to road safety and occupational health and safety.
Thank you, Ayako. So while we were in the field, we were able to observe the poor quality of the road signs, which seemed to be made by hand. They had reflective tape that was coming off. These signs were secured to twigs, which were very unstable. The community communicated to us their concerns with the road signs, as well as the lack of pedestrian crossings, speed bumps, especially now that trucks and cars would increasingly be traveling through their communities at high speeds. They also mentioned several accidents, some of them leading to fatalities, and they feared that this would increase as the road project was finalized. While we were in the field, we were also able to observe the substandard living conditions of some of the project's subcontractors. And while we heard from workers that some of the issues have been addressed by management, such as the short contracts, the hiring conditions, the overtime and delayed payments, and the health insurance issues, they were also concerned about some remaining issues such as quality of their lodging, replacement of protective equipment, lack of safety training, and faulty equipment. In response to this, the project commissioned 2 audits, one on road safety and another one on occupational health and safety, which pointed to the gravity and extent of these issues. And although the project has continuously been working to address these serious concerns, they also recognize that some challenges still remain.
So one area, Ayako, that we always look into from the inspection panel is supervision. So that's the supervision that the bank does on the project. Did we have any findings in that area?
Yes, the panel found that the frequency of bank supervision and the technical expertise that was deployed or that was part of these bank supervision to be adequate. However, with regards to the quality of supervision, prior to the submission of the request, and except for the issues related to sexual exploitation, abuse, and sexual harassment, the panel found that management didn't ensure effective monitoring of the project implementation or identified adequate follow-up action as needed. After the submission of the request, the panel recognized that management increased supervision and took various action to address issues and non-compliances related to resettlement, borrow pits, atajados, road safety, and occupational health and safety.
Now, you mentioned there sexual exploitation and abuse, sexual harassment, obviously a very serious concern of the requesters. I think, Camila, you had a particular look at that during the investigation. Maybe you can tell us what the inspection panel found in relation to that issue.
First, it is important to note the high prevalence of sexual exploitation, abuse, and sexual harassment in Latin America in general. The Department of Santa Cruz in Bolivia, where the project is located, has the highest number of incidents in the country. And we further noted in our report that indigenous communities are even more susceptible and vulnerable to these risks, particularly adolescent girls and children. The project took this into consideration and put in place a very comprehensive system for addressing and managing these incidents and risks. The existing national system, which was already known and used by the local communities in all the municipalities we visited, was continuously improved and strengthened as the allegations and incidents were reported to the project. Another very important thing to note is the rate of underreporting, which is already very high in the continent and even more so in the Chiquitania region due to the local dynamics. In indigenous communities, these issues are commonly solved internally through community assemblies headed by the local indigenous leaders, which are the caciques. So communities bring these issues to the caciques and they will be jointly deliberated. And this increases the difficulty of women coming forth and reporting such incidents. While we were in the field, we spoke to women in all the communities we visited, and we did this through individual meetings, focus groups, in community settings, and we were not able to speak to any of the survivors or victims directly. We only heard from secondary sources of isolated incidents involving minors and project workers. And in all the meetings we had with women, project workers, service providers, we did not hear of widespread cases, which is very different to what occurred in the 2014 Uganda Transport Sector Development Project and the 2017 DRC High Priority Road Project. So overall, the panel was pleased that management incorporated lessons from these two cases and that it incrementally improved its management and response to the sexual exploitation, abuse, and sexual harassment incidents in its project design.
So we've now got a good understanding of the project. We've been through the concerns of the requesters, the Chiquitano community, and we've been through outlining our findings in relation to the inspection panel investigation. I guess it now comes to what management did about this issue, and that's usually detailed in the Management Action Plan, or MAP as we like to call it. Maybe, Ayako, you could tell us a bit about sort of summarising, how did management actually address the findings of the inspection panel?
So in response to the inspection panel's investigation report and its findings, management developed a management report and recommendation. In it, management recognized many of the project's shortcomings in relation to compliance with bank safeguard policy requirements. The management report and recommendation includes actions in 5 areas that bank management and the implementing agency are to undertake. And these 5 areas of actions are related to grievance redress mechanism, borrow pits, atajados, road safety, and occupational health and safety.
So that's one aspect of the Management Action Plan, which is addressing specifically the concerns of the requesters and ideally leading to some remedy as we go forward. But another aspect of the Management Action Plan is what the bank actually learned, the sort of institutional learning. And maybe, Camila, you could tell us a little bit about institutional learning, particularly in relation to consultation on this particular investigation.
Of course. So when we look at whether consultation occurred with project-affected people, what we're doing is looking at the registers of consultations that is provided to us by the project. And what we're looking for really is whether these consultations occurred, the frequency of these consultations, their duration, how many people attended these meetings, whether different social economic groups were represented, and what was discussed in these meetings. In this case, the meeting records pointed that consultations were held. However, these consultations should be meaningful. And what this means is that they should target people who will be directly affected by the project, and they should cover specific topics of relevance to them and give them sufficient time and opportunity to discuss and raise any issues they might have with the project. And in the case of Indigenous communities, the threshold is even higher, where free, prior, and informed consent may need to be attained. So a lesson we learned from this case is that when looking and working with Indigenous communities, we need to take into consideration the local context and dynamics. So as I mentioned previously, in these communities, caciques are the focal points and issues are brought to them and then deliberated in community assemblies. So what we realized is that we needed to include them in this process. So we held smaller meetings with the caciques at first, where we shared information with them, asked any question, raised any issues, and then we gave them sufficient time to go back, take these issues to the community members and their larger assemblies, jointly deliberate, raise any questions and concerns, and then bring these issues back to us. And this for them is a dialogue. This is what they consider a meaningful consultation. And as Ayako mentioned, the requesters did not oppose the project. They recognized many of the benefits that the road upgrade would bring. However, they believed that had the adverse impacts been assessed adequately and thoroughly consulted with them, the Indigenous Peoples plan and the benefits that were proposed by the project could have been better targeted and designed to address any challenges that they might have faced.
So that's a lesson learned in relation to consultation, particularly when you have consultation with Indigenous peoples in relation to the project. But what was the most important lesson learned in relation to this investigation? Let me turn now to Ramani Kunagan, former chair of the inspection panel and actually person who actually led this actual investigation, for her thoughts on that particular point.
I think the most important learning in the Bolivia case was the underestimation of the risk. The bank made an assumption that because this was a road upgrade, that the impacts were not going to be significant. But in fact, the impacts did turn out to be significant because of, one, it was a significant upgrade, and two, this road upgrade was taking place in an area populated by indigenous communities who historically had faced issues like land pressure. And the fact that there was now a major upgrade was only going to intensify these pressures. But by underestimating the initial risk based on the assumption that this was an upgrade, the bank then did not identify several of the issues and also did not factor in the context and how these issues would play out in the context in which it found itself, which was an area that was occupied by indigenous communities.
Thank you, Ramani, and thank you, investigation officers Ayako and Camila, for this very informative discussion. On the website, you'll have this video. You've also got a non-technical summary. You've also the main report itself, over 100 pages where you can read all the detail of the investigation. And also there's an update on a regular basis of the management action plan and how that's being addressed by management. Thank you for watching this video.